In this video, we'll continue to talk about triads. We'll see what chord positions are and what they have to do with triad inversions and how to indicate inversions with something called figured bass. A lot of teaching in music theory is done with the help of something called four-part choral harmonization, also known as keyboard style harmonization, because it fits really nicely on the hands or under the hands of a pianist. And that is a style of showing or harmonizing triads so that there are 4 notes per chord, right? So we're going to have a triad and one of those notes will be doubled. There are many reasons why this is very common, and I think a lot of it has to do with Bach. In the context where you can actually see a lot of this 4-part choral harmonization at work is in Protestant hymnals. For an example, there are many others, but in Protestant churches they will often have hymn books that feature the lyrics there in the middle and have sort of a grand staff here where each chord, right, and most of them are triads, but each chord here will have 4 notes to a chord, like you can see happening here. This is because then the women will be divided into those that have higher voices and lower voices, and the ones with the higher voices will take the highest notes, and the one with the lower voices will take the lower notes of the top staff, and the men will likewise be divided in higher and lower voices, and each take their role here on the bottom staff with the bass clef. Now, even if you're not religious, I think this is an important example in order to illustrate the names of some chord positions. Now, the name of the highest note of a triad, or a chord in general, is called the soprano. That is always the case. Whenever you have that very highest note, that will automatically be called the soprano. And the other outer voice, the lowest one, is called the bass, which you can see here in the bass clef. The inner voices, the one below the soprano is called alto, and the one below that is called tenor. If you've sung in choirs, you know that these names for chord positions are also the names we give to the people who sing these chord positions, right? The high female range, typically called soprano, and you have alto for the low female range, and the tenor for the high male range and the low male range as a bass. There are many other names of voices and vocal ranges for men and women, but basically the ones that follow the chord positions are these 4. The 2 outer ones are the ones that concern us the most here when we talk about triads. Soprano being the highest and bass being the lowest. The chord positions that we've just talked about, they can be taken by any triad member. So the soprano, the highest note, a root can be placed in the soprano, the 3rd or the 5th. It really doesn't matter. Likewise, a bass can be the root, the 3rd or the 5th. But when the bass changes, right, when it's the root, the 3rd or the 5th, it affects the whole chord, its sonority, and it receives a different name because of that. When the bass is the root, right, or when the root is the bass, the triad is said to be in root position. Here we have our old friend C major, right? Here is middle C, E, and G, a major 3rd between C and E. Between E and G we have a minor 3rd. The root is the lowest note, therefore it is the bass. Notice how the 5th here is the soprano, right? The highest note that is given. Because the root is the lowest note, this is called root position. So this is a C major in root position. Look at this other chord here, this other triad. We have E, G, and C. You'll notice that those are the 3 names or note names that we saw here in C major. So this must be a C major triad as well. This one, G, C, E, the same 3 note names, it must be a C major triad as well. However, the bases of these versions here of C major are different. Here, E is the bass. E, if you'll go back to the root position, E is a 3rd. When the bass is the 3rd, the triad is said to be in 1st inversion. When the bass is the fifth, like in this case here, G, let's go back to root position, you'll see that G here is the fifth, then that is said to be in second inversion. Notice also that in these examples the soprano is also changing, and so is the inner voice here, which we're not quite sure what to call, whether tenor or alto or whatever it might be. The soprano is changing, the inner voice is changing, and the bass is changing in these examples too. But those things, the higher voices here, don't matter. To judge a position of a triad, whether it's in root position, first inversion, or second inversion, we have only to look, once we know what the triad is, what to call it, in this case C major, we have only to look at the lowest note. And then if it is a root, it's in root position. If it is a third, it's in first inversion. If it is a second, then it's in second inversion. So the position or inversion of a triad depends only on its bass. There are two ways of indicating a triad's inversion with a shorthand sort of notation. Figured bass and chord symbols. Now the split here is pretty even, where figured bass is favored in classical music theory. That's where you'll mostly see this. Sometimes also analysis of jazz might figure the figured bass. Chord symbols, on the other hand, is favored, extremely favored in jazz, rock, and other types of popular music too. So here's how you do it. If it is in root position, and if you're using figured bass, you write a 5/3 next to the chord symbol, or nothing, and that implies root position. See here my C major chord symbol. Uppercase C indicates the root. No other symbol indicates that it's a major. The quality of the triad is major. And if I had a 5/3 here, it would have indicated that this is in root position. Or if I have nothing, it also indicates that it's in root position. So I have a C major triad here in root position as well. The figured bass numbers, by the way, as you can probably notice, 5 and 3, are the intervals that are formed between the low note, right, the bass, the third, and the fifth, in this case here, or the low note, the bass, the middle note, and the soprano, in the other examples. If you're using chord symbols, you also indicate root position triad with nothing. So the way to do that with figured bass and chord symbol is basically the same. You just use the original chord symbol. Now, when you're dealing with first inversion, where the bass is the third of the triad, in figured bass, you'll indicate that with a 6/3, because you can see here that between bass and the soprano, there's a sixth, and between the bass and the inner voice, there's a third, right? Or more commonly, just a 6, just a superscript 6, like this. In chord symbols, you're more specific, whereas this is referring to an interval, right? And whatever the case would have been here, this could have been a D major, E augmented, F diminished, whatever it was, you would put a 6 here to indicate first inversion. When you're dealing with chord symbols, you're going to put the chord symbol, a slash, and then you're going to write what the name of the note at the bottom is, right? What is the bass in this particular case here, which will always be the third in first inversion. So you write C major slash the name of the lowest note, E. In second inversion, you use 6/4 in figured bass, because as you can notice, between bass and soprano, there's a sixth. Between bass and the middle note, there's a fourth. So second inversion is 6/4, or you use the same idea for chord symbols. The chord symbol, a slash, and the name of the lowest note, which in second inversions will be the fifth of that triad, right? C slash, and then the name of the note, in this case C/G. So now we have seen how triads happen. In our previous video we talked about doubling and arpeggiation and how those things figure in real life examples, and now we've seen another way, another perhaps layer of complexity or beauty that we're adding to triads, that they don't have to happen with a root at the bottom. Sometimes that place will be taken, the bass position, by the third or the fifth. So how do you look at a real life example like the one I have here? right, that I put here for you, and figure out what the heck is going on. What is a triad behind all of this? So I have 5 steps for that. Remember that previously I had 4 steps with root position triads, but now that we have added inverted triads to the mix, we can have 5 steps. First, same thing, you tally up all of the notes that you're seeing, right, to determine that all of those belong to the same triad. Cross out the doublings, and if in fact they all form a single triad, only 3 note names should remain. You arrange those 3 notes as 2 superimposed thirds. You do this so you can figure out what the root position triad is, and therefore know what the root, the third, and the fifth will be. Your 4th step will be to determine the name of that triad. The root will be the name of the triad, and then the qualities of the thirds between root and third and fifth will determine the quality of the triad. And then you add your figured bass or your chord symbol, depending on your preference or on the tradition that you're working for, or your professor's preferences, according to the chord's lowest note to the bass. So after you do all 4 steps, you just have to look at the bass and figure out, is this the root, the third, or the fifth? Is it, or in other words, is it in root position? Is it in first inversion? Is it in second inversion? And then you add the figured bass or the chord symbol according to what you find. So here's an example by Chopin. This is a prelude that he wrote, and it starts out kind of like this. Those are just the first 3 bars. And as you can notice, we are dwelling here on the same sonority. So chances are we're hammering on the same triad over and over again. So you tally up all of the notes, right? D, A, F, D, A. Always being mindful of the key signature. It's indicating for us that there's a B flat, right? D, A, F, D, A, etc., right? And then you come up to that, and then you cross out all of the notes that are repeated, and sure enough, you end up with 3, D, A, and F. Now, picturing D, A, and F, that is not a sequence of thirds here. D to A, if you go ascending, is a perfect fifth, and A to F, if once again you go ascending, is a minor sixth, right? So we have to unscramble them or scramble them, depending on how you think of it, so that they are thirds, right? And what you do is you bring that F down an octave and put it between D and A. So you have D, F, and A. D to F is a third, a minor third. F to A is another third, a major third. So now you have found the root position triad, D, F, and A. So since the root is D, this is a D triad. Between D and F, a minor third, F and A, a major third. That's minor third plus major third is a recipe of a minor triad. Therefore, the name of the triad that's being played here in these 3 measures is D minor, right? So once we know what the triad is, then we just have to go back and check out for the lowest note. The lowest note that is happening over and over and over and over here, that you can see right below the first ledger line, below the bass clef staff, that is a D. So if we have a D minor triad and the lowest note is D, or in other words, the root, all of this is a D minor triad in root position. You'll remember from our discussion that whether you're using figured bass or chord symbols, root position implies nothing after the chord symbol. So you don't actually have to write anything. If you want to be super specific or unambiguous, which you might want to be at times, you write a 5-3. But other than that, you really don't need to do that, not in this context. D minor suffices. It's indicating to me, right, and to everybody else that this is a D minor triad in root position. Okay, thanks for watching. Next time we'll talk about a different type of chord, 7th chords, and in specific, dominant 7th chords.